Hi, Caleb with Brownells here. Today we're going to be talking about bushing dies. Now we get quite a few calls on the tech line about these, about what the advantage of them is and how to use them and how to set them up and how to select the right bushings. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into that. So what a bushing die actually is, compared to a standard die, is that the neck area of the die is completely open and it takes these bushings that you can get in specific sizes. Now, the reason they do this is because across different calibers, we'll take 6.5 Creedmoor for example, different brands of brass have different thicknesses on the neck. For example, Lapua is really thick, whereas you get into the Hornady, it's closer to the medium range to low range as far as the standard goes. And the reason that's important, and why you need to use a bushing with that, is because the thicker the neck, the more the brass is worked when it's sized. So, for example, using a standard die with a fixed bushing, or a fixed neck size I should say, is going to work that thicker brass a lot more than it would some of the thinner ones. So a bushing would be beneficial there because you're going to work the neck of the brass a lot less. Now, the reason the neck gets affected whenever you're working that brass a lot less is because whenever you work the brass more, the neck can become harder. That's going to result in inconsistencies as far as your concentricity goes and your muzzle velocity goes. So a bushing die is going to help you tune that down. So if you're doing some precision shooting, a bushing die is a must in that area. So let's talk about how to select the proper bushing. Now, whenever you have your cartridge, you're going to need to measure the neck. So measuring the neck, I'll use calipers here. You're going to go ahead and get a reading. For example, this one is 291 thousandths. And that's great. We can measure a loaded cartridge. What do we do if we just have brass and we don't have a loaded cartridge? Well, what you're going to do there, you simply just measure one side of the neck, measure the other side of the neck, or just multiply that one side by 2 as long as it's concentric all the way around. And then you're going to add the bullet diameter. When you add the bullet diameter with those two measurements, then of course you get what it would be if it was loaded. When selecting a bushing, I prefer to typically get them 1/1000th less all the way up to 3/1000ths less. And what that's going to do is give me a range to kind of play with it and adjust it from there. And of course, if you're feeding from a magazine, you'll want it to be a little bit tighter so that the recoil of the rifle isn't pushing the projectile back into the case. But if you're single feeding, you can go with minimum constriction on that. And it all depends on how your rifle shoots. Every rifle is a little bit different. They'll prefer different constrictions on the neck. So you got to play with it and see what works best. So let's talk about how to insert one of these bushings into a die. So we'll take our L.A. Wilson die here. Loosen that lock ring. Unscrew the top. And now we can insert our bushing. So we'll take a bushing size here. I've selected these two for 6.5 Creedmoor. This is a 287 thousandth and a 286 thousandth, which are two pretty popular sizes for the 6.5 Creedmoor. And I would like to also mention the Redding and L.A. Wilson bushings will indeed interchange, as well as some of the other ones. And you'll notice that one side of the bushing is blank. The other side has writing on it. They're not directional. You can put them in either way, but I like to put them with the writing up so that whenever I unscrew the stem, I can just look down and visually see what size I have in there. So I'm going to take my bushing, insert it with the writing up so I can see it visually if I need to check it. Take the stem and screw it down. I'm going to screw it down until it contacts that bushing, and then I'm going to back off about a 1/16 to 1/8 of a turn and tighten my lug nut. The reason I backed off is because I want that bushing to float a little bit and have a little bit of play in there so that it will self-level on the neck of the cartridge whenever it's feeding the cartridge into the actual die itself. So another thing I'd like to mention, for example on the Redding die that the L.A. Wilson die doesn't have, you'll notice you have your decapping stem, but this one has an expander on it. So what I personally like to do with these is to remove this assembly and use the decapping as a separate process before I do my neck sizing, because we just want to size the outside of the neck, not necessarily the inside. So I'll just remove this assembly itself and set it aside. Insert my bushing, and then reinsert this assembly just as I did on the L.A. Wilson die. That's not necessary on the L.A. Wilson die because it doesn't have the expander in it. It just has the decapping assembly, which is fine. I'll leave that in there. So I'm going to take my bushing, insert it with the writing up so I can see it visually if I need to check it. Take the stem and screw it down. I'm going to screw it down until it contacts that bushing, and then I'm going to back off about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of a turn and tighten my lock nut. The reason I backed off is because I want that bushing to float a little bit and have a little bit of play in there so that it will self-level on the neck of the cartridge whenever it's feeding the cartridge into the actual die itself. It is going to be determined by what your shoulder bump is, and you'll determine that in a separate process. And that is all there is to it for bushing dies. We covered why you need them, how to use them, so you should be good to go from there. If you have any questions on bushing dies or any other reloading equipment, feel free to leave a comment below or give us a call on the tech line. We'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.